means that you have to work out how costs are calculated in this business, how pharmaceutical firms make profits, and what sort of market structure they operate in. These are the three very important relevant things that you have to include in your group report. Now, if you look at the cost structure, one of the things you need to consider very carefully is the relative importance of fixed versus variable costs. As I said in the previous video, it's important that you look at the specific details of this industry. Just looking at economic textbooks and working out costs of the firm in economic textbooks is not sufficient here. You have to apply these things to the pharmaceutical industry. And what that means is that you have to work out whether fixed costs are a very important criterion here or variable costs are. Because that makes a huge difference to how pricing happens and the amount of risk and so on in the business. If we look at the average cost diagram, which I've described here as a textbook diagram, that suggests that fixed costs are relatively low. That is a standard way of looking at analysing these things in textbooks. But that textbook view is, I don't know, something fairly normal, like producing tables, chairs, bicycles or something, where the amount of materials that you use for each unit makes a significant difference. And the assumption, one of the many hidden assumptions in this diagram is that fixed costs are not very large. For example, there's not huge research and development costs in building tables. Now, if you go on to look at some details about the actual pharmaceutical business, you remember this slide I used in the first of these videos, in the first of the handouts, the development cycle. This is the development cycle for the pharmaceutical industry. I've taken this diagram from the Associated British Pharmaceutical Industries website. There's two significant things to look at here. One is the number of years it takes to develop a drug. And according to this diagram, it takes 12, so take that as, I suppose, an average. Some drugs might be developed a bit less, maybe 10. Some drugs might take longer. The other important thing to look at is at the bottom of this, where the cost numbers are. That what this diagram indicates, by the end of the development cycle, the average drug has cost over £350 million. Now that figure is actually probably too low because these are 2001 numbers. But nevertheless, what this suggests is that development is very expensive. And one of the things you must remember here is that development cost is a fixed cost. You have to do these development costs even if you never sell anything. So this development cost is a fixed cost. So if we try and draw an average cost curve for the pharmaceutical industry, it might look something more like this. For comparison purposes, the standard textbook diagram is up in the top right hand corner of this slide. You see the big difference here is the size of the fixed cost. In this particular diagram I've just said the fixed cost is £10 million. If it's been terribly accurate for the pharmaceutical industry, I should say it's £400 million. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is the principle. Fixed cost is very large, then average cost drops very, very rapidly once you start production. So the average cost at reasonable levels of production is quite low. So the pharmaceutical industry is an industry where there's high fixed costs and there's low variable costs. So in terms of the total cost of the pharmaceutical industry, it's the fixed costs are the important one to worry about. That's the research and development costs, not the variable costs. As I probably have indicated before, in pharmaceuticals, the variable costs are the materials that are used to produce the pills or the liquid medicines and so on. And by and large, they are very cheap. So for example, for let's say a heart pill that costs £50, that's sold to the NHS for £50, the ingredients in the pill might be worth 10 pence. The rest of the costs, certainly according to the pharmaceutical industry, have to do with the very, very expensive research and development that went into developing this medicine. So that's one significant thing you have to look at here, that in the pharmaceutical industry, the average cost curve indicates the average cost curve indicates that there's a high fixed cost in this business, and it's that high fixed cost that determines a lot of what happens. Now, if we go on to put in the marginal cost curve, you'll see, I mean, it works exactly as the textbook marginal cost curve works. It's related to the average cost in the same way. It starts underneath the average costs, falls faster, and then goes through the bottom of the average cost curve. But again, the point I want to make here is that the importance of the average cost and the marginal cost curve is the steepness of the drop at the start, and that's because there's very high fixed costs here.